Today, we are continuing our look at the Sunday Gospels, and we are continuing our study of Luke chapter 8. Having healed the Gadarene demoniac in the region of the Gentiles, Jesus is now going back to the region of the Jews, where he is met by a mob of people, all looking for a miracle. Well, Jesus does offer a miracle. In fact, he offers two miracles, but not because he wants to impress the people. Instead, he offers them out of his deep compassion and love for mankind. This is Luke chapter 8, verses 41 to 56. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, and he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment. And immediately her flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, "Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me." Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher." But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well." When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, "Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." Then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately, and he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. Word has gotten out back to the Jewish communities about Jesus' miracles, about the Gadarene demoniac, probably also about calming the waves on the Sea of Galilee, and so they flocked to him hoping to see another miracle, and that's why it says that the multitudes pressed him from all sides. They're there to see the show, and they're really excited. There are, as I said, two miracles that happen in this passage, in this reading, and the subject of one of the miracles is the synagogue ruler's daughter, and then the other one is the woman with the flow of blood. Now, the ruler, he's showing some belief here, or maybe at least an openness to belief in Jesus, because the only one who has the power over life and death is God. So by coming to Jesus and appealing to his authority to be able to do something for his daughter, there's at least, in a sense, again, an openness, a desire maybe to believe that Jesus can actually do something. In the Gospel of Matthew, when we read this, he doesn't say that my daughter is dying. It says my daughter has died. In the funeral service, we call Christ our true God, who has dominion both over the living and the dead. And so this miracle is one of the ways that this is demonstrated. Obviously, the ultimate way is in his own resurrection. But this also shows us before his resurrection, it telegraphs, if you will, what is yet to come. Now in verse 42, we have a good example of how things can get lost in translation. It talks about this girl being the synagogue ruler's only daughter. When you look at the Greek, it says only begotten daughter. And only begotten is the same term, it's the same word that is used to speak about Christ. So in John 3:16, God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. So this means that this is his one and only child. He doesn't have any other children. And it's bad enough to lose any child, but it gives us a sense of the magnitude of the loss that this man and his family is facing. So we have the synagogue ruler and his daughter. The other person, the other subject of a miracle here is the woman with the flow of blood. So we also need to appreciate the magnitude of her loss. Because in Judaism, blood is unclean. And to be bleeding is to be unclean, to be ritually and socially unclean. So this woman is both a social and a spiritual outcast, not unlike the Gadarene demoniac that we read about last Sunday. So she can't associate with others, because if she associates with others, they become ritually unclean. So she can't go to anybody. She doesn't have a support network. You know, we talk about that when people go through difficult times, how important it is to have a support network. She can't have one. And she can't even go to the temple to offer prayers for her healing or for God's mercy, because then she's ritually unclean and she can't go in. And to touch Jesus was to make him unclean as well. Not to mention the fact that because there's this huge crowd around, anybody else she bumps into as she's trying to get to Jesus is also being made ritually unclean. But she's absolutely desperate. And so she tries to apply some stealth here in order to get to Jesus to hopefully receive healing. Now, St. Ambrose of Milan makes a really important observation. But when you look at the daughter of the synagogue's ruler and you look at this woman with the issue of blood, you're dealing with somebody who's an insider and someone who's an outsider. Right? The daughter of the synagogue ruler, she's the insider. She's part of that inner circle. And of course, this woman who's got the issue of blood is the outsider. Christ, out of his love and compassion, offers healing to both of them. So your status in the community is not important to Jesus. It's the suffering, and his love motivates him to reach out and to both of these women, the woman and the young girl, and offer them his healing grace. So the woman sneaks up, touches him, and Jesus says, "Who touched me?" And of course, the apostles are kind of confused, and everybody around him is really confused because he's in the middle of a crowd. So who touched me? Everyone's touching you. How can you say who touched me? But the question is a little more direct than that, because the question isn't necessarily just who touched me, as in who bumped into me, but who touched me in faith? Who touched me in faith? Because the person that touched me in faith, the power went out of me and went into this person. Of course, the woman is found out, and she tells her story. And that must have been a very, very difficult moment. I mean, she's, just the subject matter must have been difficult to talk about. The implication of what she did, and again, making all these people unclean as she was bumping into them and then touching him. But she comes out with all of it. She expresses it all. And once again, the love of God changes everything. So the Orthodox Study Bible, regarding this encounter that Jesus has with the woman, says that Jesus brings her three things. First of all, he brings her good cheer because of her faith. She's healed. Secondly, he corrects her thinking. For neither could she hide her touch from him, nor is she excluded from him because of her illness. And he exhibits her faith to all, so that they all might imitate her. So, I'm sure she was afraid of being made an example of in this thing, and that's why she's trying to sneak up and do this very quickly and quietly. Well, she was made an example of, but not a negative and an embarrassing example, but an example that all should follow, a positive example. So on this point about touching the hem of his garment, again, an important note in the Orthodox Study Bible. This is a bit long, but I'll read it to you. Just as, quote, the temple sanctifies the gold, Matthew 23:17, so also matter is sanctified by Christ's incarnation. And the power of Christ works through even his garment. To touch Christ's garment in faith is to touch him. In the church, we touch Christ through icons, oil, water, bread, wine, etc. When this is done in faith, the power of Christ is received. Faith has always been a tactile experience. Faith is not just something that we think about in our heads, ponder, but it's something that we literally embody in our daily lives. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul exhorts us to glorify God with your body, so to use our body in the glorification of God. But we also discover that the flip side of that is that we encounter the glory of God through our bodies. And so it's through all these physical things, because we don't have this sense of dualism in Orthodoxy where physical things are bad and evil and only the spiritual things are good. Physical things are good as well. And from the beginning, from the very, very beginning, the physical world was to be used as something through which we could have communion with God. If you look at Romans chapter 1, that's stated very clearly by Paul. It is our unhealthy relationship with physical things that creates the problem. But we were never intended on not embodying the faith through the various means that we have. And so, as you go to an Orthodox service, and we're embodying the faith all over the place, making the sign of the cross, lighting candles, and the icons and the incense and everything else, because we glorify God with our bodies, but we also encounter the glory of God with our bodies. Okay, so verses 49 and 50, Jesus is having this discussion, this encounter with the woman. And while this is all going on, somebody comes up, one of the servants perhaps comes up to the ruler of the synagogue and says, "Your daughter is dead. I'm sorry, it's too late." So Jesus, he had absolutely no time to stop. And I guess if you we're thinking about this and we're being honest, he didn't have to. He could have just let it pass. But he didn't, because, again, this woman was an important example for the people, and her faith and her desire to be made whole. You have a whole bunch of people that were coming looking for a miracle to be entertained, maybe so that they could finally believe. Show me a miracle and I'll believe. And Jesus wanted none of that. So she was an important figure, and she was an important example. But in doing this, it makes him late, and it makes it harder for him to get to the girl, and the girl dies. This reminds us of something that happens in John chapter 11. And this is the raising of Lazarus. So Lazarus is sick. Lazarus is the brother of Martha and Mary. We learn about Martha and Mary in the Gospel of Luke, these two sisters that host Jesus. And they send word to Jesus that Lazarus is sick and ask him to come to offer him some healing. And Jesus delays 2 days. He intentionally does not come when they ask him. By the time he gets to Bethany, Lazarus is dead. And Martha confronts him and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And she says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." And Jesus replies, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, although they die, they shall live." And of course, he raises Lazarus. And that kicks off all of the events following, which is the entrance into Jerusalem and the passion and the crucifixion. But the point being that Jesus intentionally delays going to Bethany until Lazarus is dead. And in this situation that we're looking at today, again, Jesus is not rushing to get to this girl in order to demonstrate his power and his glory. And in both cases, he's demonstrating his power and his glory by raising someone from the dead. So again, when we talk about resurrection miracles, there are three that are recorded in the Gospels, aside from obviously Jesus himself rising from the dead. He raises the widow's son in Luke chapter 7, the synagogue ruler's daughter in Luke 8, and then Lazarus in John 11. So these are the three resurrection miracles, and they are all kind of telegraphing again his own resurrection from the dead. And so there is this sense that he intentionally lets this happen in order to reveal the power and glory as the one who has dominion both over the living and the dead, over life and death. They get to the house, and it says only the girl's father and mother and who? Peter, James, and John go in. And of course, Peter, James, and John are the same apostles who will go up to Mount Tabor and will witness the transfiguration. So you had these circles, if you will, of apostles. You had the 12, you had the 70 and all the disciples, but even among the 12, you had this even sort of an inner circle of Peter, James, and John, who were witnesses to some of the most profound moments in the ministry and the life of Jesus. So he raises her from the dead and he says, give her something to eat. And this was done to demonstrate that she was really alive, that this wasn't, some kind of a phantom or something, that she was actually alive. And it reminds us of something that happens in Luke 24 when Jesus appears to his disciples after the resurrection and he asks them, do you have anything to eat? And they give it to him and he eats it in their presence, again, as a way of demonstrating that he is truly risen from the dead. Now, St. Cyril of Alexandria makes an interesting observation. He says, although the Lord well knew that the girl was dead, he said she is not dead, but rather she sleeps. What is his reason, he asks. By their laughing at him, they might give a clear and manifest acknowledgement that the daughter was dead. To have acknowledgement of many that the girl was dead, he said that she was rather sleeping. So it's that reaction. So again, people couldn't say, well, maybe, she was just unconscious. She was maybe in a coma or, Nope. So he says this, that she's sleeping to get the reaction, because in the reaction, the people are testifying, they are witnessing to the fact that the girl really was dead and that he raises her from death. And of course, this happens. And then he does something that he will do from time to time in the Gospels after performing a miracle. He tells the girl's parents, don't tell anyone what has happened. So why does he do that? Well, he knows that it will create a tumult. The crowds are already worked up, right? They're pressing in on him. It's interesting, actually, that word in the New Testament, when it says they thronged him, that in Greek, it actually says they choked him, that they were pressing on him so hard that it was almost like hard to breathe. That's how much they were pressing in on him. So they're already worked up in a frenzy. This would be his second resurrection miracle in what was probably a short time. Again, Luke chapter 8, he raises the son of the widow of Nain. Well, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe that was a fluke. Maybe he really wasn't dead. So now he's done it again. No mistake now. And the reaction of the people could force a response from the Jewish leadership. We got to do something about this guy. And it wasn't time for all of that yet. Because we do notice that it is after he raises Lazarus from the dead that the Jewish leaders say, okay, that's enough. But it wasn't time yet. He still had more ministry to do, earthly ministry to do. And so he says, don't tell anybody, because he knows what that would set in motion. It will set it in motion, but not yet. St. Ambrose of Milan said, when our Lord says she is not dead but sleeps, they laughed him to scorn. For whoever does not believe laughs. Let them therefore mourn their dead who think they are dead. Where there is a belief of the resurrection, the notion is not of death, but of rest. That reminds us of one of the refrains in our funeral service, give rest, O Lord, to the soul of your servant who has fallen asleep. And that's how we remember the dead in our funeral services and our memorial services, those who have fallen asleep. This reminds us of something that we also hear in the funeral service from 1 Thessalonians. It's the epistle reading This is 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 13. But I do not want you ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as those who have no hope. Paul does not say don't sorrow. He says don't sorrow as those who have no hope. Because saying goodbye is painful. Death is a difficult thing to deal with. But in Christ, death is not permanent. The resurrection changes our very understanding of death. One of Paul's essential messages is that in the resurrection of Christ, everything changes. So death is no longer our undoing. It's a time for rest. And if we rest, we'll rise up again into the glory of God's kingdom. Thanks for watching today. Until next time, take care, and God bless.